Hi everyone, welcome back. We have completed 7 modules until now, and we are about to start the 8th module, which is your network layer module. So let's get going. Network layer is the actual linchpin which holds this entire networking architecture model together. It is layer number 3 of the OSI model, and it is situated between the transport layer and the data link layer. Network layer is the one which actually makes internet possible because it is the one which connects the different networks together. So let's see what this module we are going to cover, or what are the different topics in this module. There are different topics here. The first thing we will be studying is about the different characteristics of the network layer. We will also be studying a brief about the IPv4 packet and the IPv6 packet, and how does a host route, what are the different ways that routing is possible, and also how are the routing tables exhibited, and what are the different things that a routing table consists of. So we'll go in depth about these things. First, let us start with the network layer characteristics. The network layer characteristics. First, in order to study about the characteristics, you should understand what are the main functionalities of a network layer. The 4 functionalities that a network layer is responsible for are addressing of the end devices, encapsulation of data, routing, and decapsulation. So encapsulation, decapsulation, we already studied earlier. It is nothing but you perform the addition of headers to the data that is being sent by your upper layers. Whereas addressing here, we actually do the addressing by a protocol called as Internet Protocol, IP addresses. We have 2 versions of it currently, IPv4 and IPv6. We will be studying about what IPv4 is and what IPv6 is, and also what are the main differences between these 2 versions. Routing is very important because it's completely dependent on routing. How does a packet move from one particular host to another particular host, whether it is belonging to the whether it belongs to the same network or a remote network? All those things are covered under routing issues. So if you see here, it says IP version 4, IPv4 and IPv6 are the principal network layer protocols that are used in your network layer. If you check it out here, what we discussed about the IP encapsulation part. The IP encapsulation part is simple. That now imagine that this is the segment that is transported from your transport layer, that is given by your transport layer. Once it is given by the transport layer, it goes into the data section, and network layer adds something called as a IP header to it. Now this becomes your network layer PDU. PDU stands for Protocol Data Unit. PDU stands for Protocol Data Unit. Now the name given to the network layer PDU is the packet. The transport layer's PDU is often called as segment. So now when the packet goes to the data link layer at the bottom, a frame is created. So data link layer's PDU is called as a frame. PDU stands for Protocol Data Unit. This process of addition of the headers at each and every respective layers is called as encapsulation. Network layer does that. So once you have the source IP address and destination IP address added in this IP header here, it will remain the same until this particular packet reaches the final destination. Now, what are the different characteristics of this internet protocol or IP? IP can be best described by using 3 terms. The first term is something called as connectionless. The second term is called as best effort service. And the third one is media independent. Connectionless, the name itself is self-explanatory. It suggests you that for IP communication, there is no need to establish a communication, or there is no need to establish a connection first before sending your packet. You can simply send the packet, leave it. Just like the best analogy for the IP is your postal service. You write a letter, put it inside an envelope, write the full destination address on it, and put it in your post box. You don't call them and you don't set everything up. You just put it in the post box and hope that it will be delivered to your destination. There is no control information needed. You won't get anything back. The destination will receive the packet when it arrives, but there is no notification sent by the IP saying that you might receive a packet before. No. If you require a connection oriented service, then you will prefer the TCP in the transport layer, that is the upper layers. TCP is the connection oriented protocol. Please remember that IP is connectionless. Connectionless means there is no requirement of establishing a connection prior to the communication. Now the second one, or the second characteristic, is called as best effort. It goes in line with your connectionless service. It says that it does not guarantee delivery of the packet. It doesn't say you that, okay, I'm going to definitely deliver it to the destination. It will try its best. to deliver the packet. For this, because there is no checking of the errors or anything here, what happens is there is no requirement of retransmission. There is, so it has got less overhead. As I said, IP does not expect any acknowledgements, or it does not even know if the other device is operational or not, or if it has received the packet, because it does not give any acknowledgements. This is called as a best effort service. And coming to the third one, we also call it as media independent. First things first, IP is unreliable. Unreliable and connectionless both are less the same. They go in line with one another. As I said, it doesn't not fix or undelivered or corrupt packets. It does not care whether the destination is there or not, whether the destination has received the packet or not, or whether the destination has received the packet without any errors or not. It cannot retransmit after an error. All these things should be taken care by an upper layer protocol, simply TCP protocol, if you are requiring all these things. So this is what it says here. IP must rely on other protocols for these functions. It cannot realign out of sequence packets also. The term media independent is because irrespective of the media that is present below your physical layer, if it might be an optical fiber, it might be a copper medium, or it might be a serial line communication, or it might be wireless, irrespective of the medium that is present below your physical layer, it has nothing or it has no impact whatsoever on your internet protocol. It works the same. It doesn't take anything else into consideration. Although medium dependent is your data link layer, max sub layer. We studied 802.3 standards, 802.11 standards, 802.15 standard, all those things we studied there, right? So please remember that IPE is media independent. It does not care what type of medium is present below your physical layer. And last but not the least, it also establishes the maximum transmission unit, MTU. MTU is nothing but the maximum size permissible for a packet. In cases, if at all, there is the segment that has been transmitted by, or that is given by your transport unit is larger than the MTU, then it actually breaks it into smaller pieces, fragments. These fragments are numbered and actually sent, and at the receiver, all these fragments are reassembled together. That means if I say that I can only take 1 kilo units, and if I receive a 3 kilo bag, I have to divide it into 3 1 kilos, and I'll number them 1 2 3, which belong to the same packet, and I will transmit these 1 kilo packets or 1 kilo fragments across the network. And at the receiver, all these 1 kilo fragments will be combined together to give the 3 kilo packet to the upper layers, like this. So this MTU is actually, the MTU size or the size of the maximum transmission unit is actually decided based on the information sent by the data link layer. It will tell you. And as I told, if the MTU, if the size of the packet is larger than the MTU, what you do is you actually break it into parts. That is called as fragmentation. IPv6 does not fragment packets, because fragmentation creates latency. You have to take everything into control and you have to reassemble them at the receiver. Okay. Now let's see what this IPv4 packet consists of. What is all the information that is present in the packet? Remember that whatever data is actually given to the network layer by your transport layer, a IP header is added to it. This header, the packet is nothing but, once the header is added, we call it as an IPv4 packet. Once again, there are two versions of your IP protocol, IPv4 and IPv6. So first, let us start studying about IPv4 packet, what it does, what is all the control information that is present in this particular packet. Now, if you check out here, as I told you, the whatever information we place in the header, we call it as a control information, because that control information is required by each and every host on the network, which will receive this packet, to guide it properly towards the destination. I have to write something on it, so that if I write something on the letter that I wanted to post, I have to write the full information. I have to write the full destination address. Only then the postman can read it, and whoever touches the letter and whoever processes that letter will know how to forward it to the next point. Similarly, all that kind of information is actually now present within this header. If you check out, I'll just explain to you the different fields of the header here. Now, the first field is called as a version field. Please remember that the size of your IPv4 header is 20 bytes in length. 20 bytes. 20 bytes is equal to 160 bits. So each line here is 32 bits in length. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 lines, 532s, 160 is equal to 20 bytes. 20 into 8, 160 bits. Okay. So now let's start from the first field. The first field is the version field, which will tell you whether this packet is an IPv4 or IPv6. Straightforward. And The next one is it gives you something called as a internet header length. So it will give you the length of this particular header. What is the length of this header here? So you might ask me, sir, why? We will explain it in the next parts. Okay. So the next thing comes here is something called as a differentiated services. This particular byte is purely for providing quality of service. So this DSCP stands for differentiated services code point. We call it as differentiated services code point. ECN stands for explicit congestion notification. So all these particular fields, all these things will actually tell how to or what are the parameters required for assuring the quality of service for this particular packet. I don't want to go in depth about the quality of service now because it's a vast concept. Please remember that this field will tell the routers on the way how to handle this packet, what kind of service it requires. The next thing is the total length field, which will give you the length of the entire packet, including the header as well as the data. The next field is called as an identification field. The identification field and the fragment offset. I told you about the MTU. And if the packet size is greater than the MTU, you break it into parts. Now, if you break it into parts, how does the receiver know how many, which part belongs to which particular packet? So if I have a packet, and let us assume that if I have this packet P1, okay, and if I have broken this packet into maybe 1, 2, 3, and 4 fragments based on the MTU, the identification field for all these 4 fragments will be the same. And this fragment offset will tell you where the piece fits. So for the first one, the fragmentation offset will be 0. The second one for the fragmentation offset will be 1. For the third one, the fragmentation offset will be 3 and will be 4. Or sorry, it's 2 and 3. So the receiver knows which fragment fits where. And it also knows that all these 4 fragments belong to the same packet because the identification field is same. The flags here provide a lot of control information, which we are not going to discuss here. You can study it later on. The next important field you have to understand is time to live field. The reason why we don't IPv6 removed most of these headers, most of the fields in this header now, it's a completely different setup. I'll explain it now. The next field is something called as a time to live field. It is nothing but a hop counter. Now I don't want a packet to stay indefinitely in the network. So if I have a network for maybe 30 nodes, I can say that for any destination in this particular network of 30 nodes, the maximum number of hops. Hop is nothing but if a packet moves from one particular node to another particular node, we call it as a hop. The maximum number of hops any packet can reach any destination is 30. So I'll put 30 here. So for each and every hop, the counter gets decremented from 30, 29, 28, 27. So if at all the packet did not reach the destination and the TTL field is equal to 0, it is discarded. So the time to live field is placed to make sure that packets do not stay indefinitely on the network. It is nothing but a hop counter which gets decremented for each and every hop the packet moves. The next field is called as a protocol field. The protocol field is going to tell you what type of protocol is used in this data here. So it actually tells the receiver how to process this packet, whether to forward it to TCP or UDP. That is given here in the protocol field. The next is called as the header checksum. So this header checksum is the checksum for error control with only the header itself. It is calculated for this header only, and it will tell the receiver whether everything has been received correctly or not. The next things come in these particular headers are the source IP address and the destination IP address. Both of them are 32 bits in length. IPv4 address is 32 bits in length, and these are all the fields of your IPv4 header. Remember that it is 20 bytes, and we have all these things, all the fields over here. And if you see, it is all in binary. It contains lots of information, and we read it from left to right, 4 bytes per line, that is 32 bits. And the most important fields are the source IP address and destination IP address. Now, from this IPv4, now we move on to IPv6. Let us see how the IPv6 header looks like. So this is the same which we just discussed right now. What we do, what are all the things, version, differentiated services, header checksum. It is to detect whether there are any mistakes in the IPv4 header or not. All those kind of things. It's the same thing. So let me go to the IPv6 packet. So let us see how IPv6 header looks like and what are all the components that are present in it. Now, if you check, Before going there, first of all, you have to understand why we should go for IPv6. When IPv4 is working well, why should we go to IPv6? What is the reason behind it? There are three major issues with IPv4. The three major issues for IPv4 are, the first thing is the address depletion. IPv4 is no longer sufficient. With the huge number of devices being connected to the internet daily, IoT, you take big data, you take artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these technologies are coming up, and there are so many number of devices that are being connected to the internet every day. IPv4 is not designed for that. Okay, we are actually, we did some modifications to IPv4 to run, but it is not a permanent solution. And secondly, we are currently using a technology called as NAT, or a technique called as NAT, network address translation, where we separate the IP address space as public addresses and private addresses. There we can actually increase IPv4, but honestly, NAT is not a permanent solution, because it increases the complexity for some of the technologies or some of the applications, and the lack of the end-to-end connectivity is present if we use NAT. If you don't use NAT, address space won't be sufficient. These are the three major issues which IPv4 faces. Address space not sufficient, usage of network address translation increases the complexity, and the same, once you use NAT, the end-to-end connectivity is not present, which is mandatory for some applications if you use TCP. So we want to go for a new thing, basically, which does the same job for your network layer. And the new version is IPv6. So the first thing about IPv6 is the length of an IPv6 address is 128 bits in length. We studied a little bit of IPv6 addresses earlier in module 5. Remember that IPv6 addresses are 128 bits in length. So automatically the space is now huge, and also the packet handling is improved. There is no NAT required at all, and there are a lot of security features integrated into the IPv6. So to see the number, this is the number of IPv6 addresses that are available. We call it 340 undecillion addresses. That means 340 into 10 power 36. Roughly, if you calculate the number of grains of sand on the entire earth, it is equal to this number. So rest assured, we can say that the address depletion problem won't be a problem again for the next maybe 100 to 150 years. We have so many number of addresses now, 340 undecillion addresses. This is the actual number. You can see down at the bottom of the screen. So the address depletion will no longer be a problem with IPv6. If you see, this is the reason why we go for IPv6 is it overcomes the problems which we face with IPv4. Huge address space, the packet handling has been improved. Some of the fields which are in IPv4 are removed now. Some of the fields are renamed simply because to increase the efficiency and also to reduce the delay at the routers. Because the packets travel through routers, there is always a delay to process the particular packet. So in order to increase the time taken there, the IPv6 packet header has been designed accordingly. So these are the three things we just discussed, and let me show you the IPv6 header. So there is some color format here. If you see, this particular violet color shows you that the field's name kept from IPv4 to IPv6 is the same. The version remains the same, IPv4 or IPv6. The source IP address remains the same, and the destination IP address remains the same. But if you see, the header length is now 40 bytes. If you ask me why, because the source IP address is 128 bits, the destination IP address is 128 bits. Okay, 40 bytes is equal to 320 bits. Okay, now the remaining things are the same 32, 32. Okay, 64. Now if you see here, 32, 32 to 64 and 128, 128, 256. Altogether we get the 320 bits. If you check out, the name and position changed in IPv6, green color. If you see traffic class, this is the same name, or this does the same functionality like your differentiated services in your IPv4. I told you that particular field will actually tell you the quality of service required for that particular packet. Maybe less delay or more bandwidth, all those kind of things, less jitter. Those kind of things comes under the purview of the quality of service. So there we used to have a differentiated services field. Now we are having a traffic class field, which does the same job. And the payload length, which is actually going to tell you only the length of your data. Only the length of your data. The next header is very much equal to the protocol field. It is also going to tell you what type of protocol do you expect in the data below. It will tell the receiver how to handle this packet. Hop limit is your TTL field, time to live field. We just changed the name here. Once again, it gets decremented for every hop the packet takes, and if the hop limit counter gets 0, the packet will be discarded. The last thing, the new field in IPv6 is your flow label. Once again, flow label is actually used in to something you call, I don't know whether you heard this or not, we call it as MPLS, multi-protocol label switching. So flow label, what it does is, any particular packet which has the same kind of flow label will get the same kind of service at the routers. So based on the flow label, the router can actually provide the services. So if I say that some of the packets are maybe video conferencing packets, they will have the same kind of flow label there. So with the same kind of flow label there, the router expects them or knows what to provide to these things. In such a way, flow label is used. So these are the different header fields of your IPv6. The remember that IPv6 has an option of extension headers also. Extension headers, we call them as EHS. So these extension headers add some more information to the IPv6 header. Sometimes like timestamp or delays or all those kind of things are added to the extension headers. They're only optional. They're only optional. And if you have those headers, you will note them down in the next header field. It will tell that there is an extension header at the bottom. Okay. So as I said, these extension headers provide you additional information, maybe for security or for mobility support or from any of those issues. If you want, there are a lot of extension headers available. You can browse the internet if you're interested. So let's get on with so this is regarding about your IPv4 and IPv6 headers. So what to expect for these IPv4 and IPv6 packets? Do remember that the header contains all the control information that is required to handle the packet. Okay, now let's get on with how a host routes. When I say routes, it's actually a route. Right? We call it as the actual pronunciation is routing, but excuse me. Okay, now if you take a host, remember that it can actually do 3 types of forwarding, or it can send packets to 3 ways. The 3 ways are, the first is to itself. Now let me take as an example here. Let me say that my host is PC1. I'm taking this as my host. Okay. Now it can send packets in 3 ways. The first is for itself. We call it as a loop back address 127.0.0.1 in IPv4 and double colon 1 in IPv6. This is called as a loop back address and it is used to test itself usually. So it can send packets to itself using this address. The second way of sending is something called as a local host. Local host means these systems are the hosts that are connected in the same LAN. For PC1, PC2 is a local host because it is connected to the same network via the switch. The third one is called as a remote host. Remote host means it can be any device in other networks. For PC1, there is a server here which is a remote host because this is not connected with the same network, within the same network. So what is this network? This is your network address. We will study about these network addresses in module 11 and 12 in depth because we will be working on a lot of these issues. Okay, so this is the network address over here. Now any particular host that are connected belonging to this particular switch or belonging to this network are local hosts. The source device determines whether the destination is local or remote. So this actually has to decide whether it is a local device or whether it is a local host or a remote host. Sir, how does it decide? How does it know? Two things. In IPv4, it can use this particular IP address. Now, usually the notation here is, if this is the network address, the IP address of PC1 should be read as 192.168.10.10. For PC2, the IP address is 192.168.10.15. The .15 here. See na? So you just put it in the network part. Similarly, for R1, it is .1 here. Usually we call it as a default gateway. We will study it later. So 192.168.10.1 will be the IP address here. Okay. So in IPv4, the source can actually use its own IP address and subnet mask and then decide whether it is a local host or a remote host. In IPv6, the network actually provides messages, the router provides messages regarding all the local networks and all those things. So it is easy. Local traffic is dumped out on the host interface to be handled by an intermediary device. This is what the host interface, whereas the remote traffic is forwarded directly to the default gateway on the LAN. So what is this default gateway and why do we need it? Please remember that default gateway is one of the most important concepts in networking. Without a default gateway, you will not be able to send packets into the outside networks. What is a default gateway? It is the network device. It can be a router or it can also be a layer 3 switch, not a layer 2 switch. Layer 3 switch representation is different. We'll study in network in CCNA 2. We call it as an MLS, multi-layer switch, which can work both in layer 2 and layer 3. It's a slightly bigger representation. If you're done in the module 1 and module 2, I have shown you some diagrams. Okay, you must have seen the MLS. Remember that the default gateway is the network device that can route or that has the ability to send the traffic to other networks, not within the network, to other networks. So what is the feature of the default gateway? It must have an IP address in the same range as the rest of the local area network, and it can accept data from the LAN and is capable of forwarding traffic off of the LAN. It can route to the other networks. Simply speaking, just take our example. Now PC1 and PC2, they can communicate each other. PC1 can send a packet to PC2, just the switch can forward it. But if there is a PC3 here, imagine if there is a PC3 here, which is completely a remote network. What happens if I want to send it to PC3 here? Because we don't know about it. Now, the only way a packet can be moved or can be sent to PC3, which is on a remote network, is for it to be delivered to the default gateway. Here, R1 is the default gateway for this network. For any packets that wishes to go out of this network, they have to go via the R1 only. Now, sir, how do you define the default gateway? This is the default gateway. Then how do you put it there, sir? Now, please remember that the IP address of the router's interface to which this network is connected to will become your default gateway. So in PC1 and PC2, I have to specifically write a code saying that, or you can put it the default gateway. There's a slot in the default gateway for your IP address assignment window. So in the address assignment window, in the default gateway, I have to write down 192.168.10.1. Only then PC1 can send a packet to outside world. Similarly, in PC2, I have to maintain the default gateway as 192.168.10.1, and also for this particular switch also. So unless until I define the default gateway, you will not be able to send packets to the outside world or to other networks. Please do remember this. Most of the students do a mistake by not specifying the default gateway. If you don't specify the default gateway, your network or your packets will not leave your own network. They cannot go outside because they don't know the direction. So the default gateway address is this. Similarly, if you imagine this scenario towards this side, the default gateway will be this particular interface based on the network here. If there is no default gateway, you cannot send traffic to it. Sir, how do you know what the default gateway address is? There are once again two ways, manual or DHCP. You can actually give it manually, or you can simply set up the DHCP so that the DHCP will provide the default gateway to your host. And IPv6, in case of IPv6, you get it through your router solicitation message. We just told you, right? How do you know? Because in IPv6, the router keeps on sending the messages about all this information. Now, for a default gateway is a static route, which will be a last resort. I will tell about the static routes and what is this or what is its role for routing in just a minute later. Because in the next slides, I'll tell you about how the routes are handled or what is the information that is present in a routing table. Please remember that. Do not get confused. Route default gateway is nothing but it is the path through which the packets of one network have to be sent in order to go out of that network. That's all. Now, because R1 is connected here, the switch will say that this is my default gateway, and any traffic from PC1 and PC2 that wishes to go outside of this network has to go through this particular interface or this particular thing. See, if the IP address of the R1 interface is the default gateway address for PC1 and PC2. Okay. Now, these are the host routing tables. So how do you know what the host routing tables are? Now, when you type in this particular command routeprint or netstat r on the display PC, you find three things. You find the interface list, you find the IPv4 routing table, and you also find the IPv6 routing table. I will show you on my PC. Give me a second. Now I have opened the command prompt on my system, and if I type in netstat -r, see, it is actually giving me three things. There are three things that are printed over here. The first one is your interface list. The second one is the IPv4 routes, and the third one are the IPv6 routing table or route tables. So these are the three things that you can find out. You can simply type in netstat r on your system. Okay, so let me show you what kind of information is present in a router. So usually a router maintains the routing tables. Let me show what kind of information is present in a routing table at a router, and how do you find, or how do you interpret the information from that particular tables. So now you have seen how the host routing tables are there. Just simply type in this command netstat -r. Also, you can type in root print. Both of them give the same kind of display. Okay. So now let's start. What is routing and how does a routing table looks like? Okay. So whenever you see the routing table, whenever a host sends a packet to another host, it will use its routing table to determine where to send the packet. Once again, if the destination host is on remote network, the packet is forwarded to the default gateway. For the internal network, you can simply forward it to the switch and it will be done. For now, any router's routing table information, there are three types of information that are present. The first one is something called as a directly connected route. This is straight away from the interface to the wires that are connected to the router. Imagine in module 10, we will be working on the configuration of routers. We will have a lot of packet tracer demos. I'll be showing them to you. And please remember that. So when we connect the wires to a router does not have one IP address. A router has an IP address for each one of the interfaces. If you connect 4 links to a router, each one of those links will have an IP address corresponding to the network to which it is connected to. That is what a router does. Please remember that. So we have a directly connected routes, which is nothing but the addresses of the interfaces or the networks which are directly connected to the router. I'll show you a small diagram and I will explain to you with the example. Now the second one is something called as a remote route. Remote routes is that it does not have a direct communication link. So how to go there? To what interface I should forward my packet next in order to reach the remote destination. And the third one is a default route. Default route is usually set by the network administrator, and sometimes it will be also the default gateway address. So if you don't understand these things, check this diagram out. It will be very easy to understand. Let me take the example of R1 here. Let R1 be my particular router to which I am interested in. I told you there are three things. There are three different types of information that it is present. The first one is something called as directly connected routes. So what are the directly connected routes? In R1's table, if you see here, R1 is directly connected to 3 networks. Now this particular here is one network. This is another network, and this is the third network to which R1 is directly connected to. Okay, sir, what do you mean by direct connectivity? It has a direct link, and also it has an address, IP address belonging to this network. So the IP address, as I told you, R1 does not have one IP address. If there are 3 lines here, R1 will have 3 IP addresses for these 3 lines. These are called as interfaces. So for each and every interface, R1 will have one IP address. Okay, so the IP address for this interface is 192.168.10.1. For this, it is 192.168.11.1. For this, it is 209.165.200.225. And for R2, the IP address of this interface is 209.165.200.226. Do you understand now? So R1 has 3 directly connected networks, 1, 2, 3, and it also has 2 remote networks. These are the remote networks with perspective to R1. For R2, it is also directly connected to 3 networks, and it has 2 remote networks here. Now do you understand? Now in your routing table, as I told you, the first one is a directly connected network, the second one is a remotely connected network, and the third one is a static route. I'll tell you more about the static route now. Okay, now if you understand, so if you see here, these two are your directly connected routes, or these 3 are your directly connected routes, and these 2 are your remotely connected routes. So a routing table at R1 should have this information saying that how to route a packet into these networks, and how to also should have the information how to route packets to these 2 networks also. So let's see how, what. If you can ask me, sir, how does the R1 know about these 2 things? Who tells to it? Either the network administrator can set it up manually, or you can actually use any dynamic routing protocol such as OSPF or other things, RAP. All these protocols will help R1 to know about these 2 things. EIGRP, there are many routing protocols. We'll discuss them later. So R1 can know about these remote networks in those 2 ways. One of them is manual and the other one is dynamically. Now let me show. First thing, let us say that static routing. As I told you, Static routing means the network administrator will set up a static route. What do you mean by static route, sir? Now, if I specify here, this is the command IP route. Now take R1. Now, if I am the network administrator, I'm saying that for any traffic to go to this network, to PC2, there is a PC2 here. It is connected to 10.1.0 network. Now, if I'm saying that any packets in order to go to this network, it has to go through this route only. For that purpose, I'm writing a command IP route 10.1.1.0. This is the subnet mask that is given, and I'm saying that go through this particular pathway only. What is this? This is the IP address of the interface to which R1 is connected to R2. I'm saying that in order to go here, forward the packets with the destination address as .226. So this is a static route. How do I set it? I simply type in IP route. Now when I type in IP route, automatically I'm setting up the static route. So this has to be configured manually by the administrator. The problem here, this is actually a good way, because it need not, here what is a good thing is the packet need not be analyzed by R2, and it does not need to take a routing decision. It need not run the routing algorithm again, time consuming. This static routing or setting of these static routes is good only if your network size is not big. Non-redundant networks, small networks, this is very good, because you know where they are, to which they are connected, to which interface is which, everything works well. But check the below diagram. If there is a problem that might happen with R2, say this link is gone, this link with R2 is gone, what happens, sir? Because you have set up the static route as this, there is another pathway to go to this network via R3. This is another way. But unfortunately, if you use static routing, it will not go for the alternate routes. It waits for a new static route. It cannot take it. So it does not automatically adjust for topology changes. Okay. Sometimes when you have large networks, we use static routing and dynamic routing also. We will be doing a lot of these things in CCNA2 when you work on the routing algorithms. So these are your static routing. Please remember that static routing must be configured manually. It must be adjusted manually by the administrator when there is a change in the topology, where something goes down or something new comes up. And this is only good for small and non-redundant networks. Usually, to have better efficiency, we use both static routing and dynamic routing. Now let's see what you mean by dynamic routing. Here, what the dynamic routing is, there are many protocols like OSPF, EIGRP. They let R1 and R2 communicate with one another. Now, if you see here, what happens is the R1 is using OSPF protocol to let R2 know about this network. R2 does not have a direct connection to this network. Let us say that this is one network, right? Let us say that this is one network. R2 doesn't have a direct connectivity. It doesn't know that. But through these dynamic routing protocols, R1 can inform R2 saying that I am connected to this network, and if you want to transmit anything, forward it to me. Similarly, this is another network here. This is another network here. R2 can use the same protocol to tell R1 about this network. So both R1 and R2 can know about the remote networks. R1 already knows this is the directly connected network. Now it knows the information about this remote network via R2 through the dynamic routing protocol. Sir, what is the same thing in the last slide that we discussed? Sir, what happens if this path is gone? Fine. If this path is gone, maybe R2 will inform R3 saying that this route is gone. You have to update the topology. Now, if there is a change in the topology, with dynamic routing, the routes or the routing table will be automatically updated. There is no need for an administrator to come and manually change them, because it's dynamic. It keeps on changing according to the changes of your topology. They can automatically adjust to find the new best path. So dynamic routing can also share, as I said, dynamic routing can also have the static routes. Both of them can be used together to have the better efficiency. So dynamic routing is best because it will make, or it will allow the routers to know about remote networks and also to maintain up-to-date information, and it will allow the router to choose the best path. In static routing, whatever path I specify, they have to take it, irrespective whether it is best or not. No issues, nothing. The router doesn't have a say in the decision. It will simply has to follow the static route. In dynamic routing, now it can have multiple paths. It can take a decision. Okay. So this is regarding this, and this is how a IPv4 routing table looks like. Please do not get confused or do not get panic. It's very simple, very easy. Now take R1 once again. Take our example of R1. Let's see what you understand. Now when I go to R1 and type in the command show IP route, this is the command which will show you the routing table that is present in R1. Now I told you any routing table contains three types of information: directly connected route. The second one is remote routes. The third one is static routes. Right. Now there is some code which are given here. If you see, there are some certain codes: S, O, C, L, C. So these codes indicate what type of route it is. L indicates it is a directly connected interface address. L indicates. C indicates it is a network that is directly connected to the router. So L indicates it is a local, it is the directly connected interface address. C indicates it is a directly connected network. S indicates it is a static route which has been given by the administrator. O indicates that a dynamic algorithm OSPF is used to learn about this particular network path. Similarly, if EIGRP is used, we place a D there. Now check it out. I typed in show IP route in R1. What happens, sir? If you see, it is all giving all this information. There is something called as an S star. Now for all the default routes, if you see the network has 0.0.0.0/0, it simply says that if the router doesn't know what to do with an incoming packet, I don't know what to do with that packet, I don't know, it does not match any of these things, I will simply send it to the default route. Here the default route is given as 209.165.200.226. It means that if the router R1 does not know what to do with an incoming packet which has an IP address which it does not understand, it will simply forward it onto the .226 interface of R2. This is the default gateway. And similarly, this is a default route that has been set. Okay, this is not my mistake. It's not default gateway. It's a default route that has been set, and also the static route. I have given it manually, so that shows it's a default route and also the static route. Now O here tells that there is a network 10.1.1.0. Where is this network? 10.1.1.0 and via 209.165.200.226. This is here. This is one network. If you can see clearly, this is one network. It's saying that it is been learned or it has learned about this remote network via OSPF protocol. O here. O indicates that this information, where did it get it? It has got it through the dynamic routing protocol of OSPF. Sir, why are you mentioning the dynamic routing protocol here? Because during routing information, there are some weightages given to the routing protocols. We'll discuss it further in our further modules. But please remember that this is very important. The code or how a router has got the remote information, the information about the remote routes is also very important. C is saying that this is your remotely connected network. If you see 10.0, guys, please remember one thing: .0 is always a network address. No host will be given a .0. .0 always stands for a network address. So 192.168.10.0, it is directly connected. See, this is directly connected. See, L says that 192.168.10.1. If you see, it's a 1. I told you how to read the IP address here. You take the network, slot in the IP address in the last part. So it is saying that L is the directly connected local interface address. Similarly, this is also a local, which says that 200.225 because this is the address L. C says that it is the network that it is connected to .224/30. It takes a little bit of understanding. It takes a little bit of time for us to grasp all these things. Now, this is how a routing table looks like at any particular router. I told you earlier, any routing table only contains three information: static routes, default routes, remote routes. Sorry, static routes, directly connected routes, and remote routes. So the remote information, how does it get it? We are seeing a O here for OSPF. But now if I use EIGRP, I might see a D there. Directly connected routes are shown by C and L. L is your interface, C is the directly connected network. Okay, so we'll stop there. This is the end of the module. So please get your heads around this information. Most of this information you won't find it in your theoretical part because it's a little bit different to what we teach in the theory. In theory, we talk about just differential the two routing protocols, link state routing, distance vector routing, all those things we talk about, and we don't talk much about this type of routing here. In the next modules, we will be covering in depth about the routing protocols, how we see and how do you interpret these particular routing tables, because you will be having some troubleshooting questions in your exams also. Please remember that C, L, D, O, all these codes are very, very important. Now, what did we learn is to just summarize what we learned in this particular module. IP is connectionless, best effort, and media independent. I told you connectionless, no connections, best effort. It will only try to deliver it. Media independent. It is not dependent on the type of the medium that you use. IP does not guarantee packet delivery. IPv4 packet header consists of fields containing information about the packet. It's the same thing. And IPv6 network address range is quite high when you compare it to IPv4. And a device will determine if the destination is itself another host or a remote host. And please remember that the most important point for me is a default gateway is a router that is part of the LAN and will be used as a door to other networks. So if you want to go out of your network to another network, you have to go through that door only. That door we have to specify as the default gateway. The routing table contains a list of all known network addresses, prefixes, and where to forward the packet. The router uses the longest subnet mask or prefix match. We'll discuss these things. And the routing table has three types of route entries: directly connected networks, remote networks, and a default route. So with that, I will close my module for now. And I hope you understood all the particular elements which are here. So thank you very much. And the next module, we will discuss about ARP. Thank you.